Some players retire with a victory lap, hoisting the Lombardi Trophy amidst a shower of confetti. Others are forced out by the cruel reality of a declining body, their final moments spent on a cold sideline or a trainer's table. And then there are those who walk off the field after a standard Sunday afternoon, not fully realizing that they have just unbuckled their chin straps for the very last time. For the legends of the NFL, the transition from the gridiron to the history books is rarely a smooth one. The 10 icons we are discussing today represent the absolute pinnacle of the sport, combining for 16 Super Bowl championships and over 90 Pro Bowl appearances. These are the men who defined the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the players you watched on grainy television sets and talked about at the water cooler the next morning. Before we dive into the final chapters of these legendary careers, if you spent your Sundays watching the Steel Curtain, the Air Coryell offense, or the Doomsday Defense, you're in the right place. We're dedicated to preserving the history of the game we all grew up with, so feel free to join our community as we look back at the moments that made the NFL what it is today. Now, let's look at the final games of 10 NFL legends. Joe Montana. By the time 1994 rolled around, the sight of Joe Montana in a Kansas City Chiefs jersey was still jarring for many. After 4 Super Bowl titles and 3 Super Bowl MVPs with the San Francisco 49ers, Joe Cool had been traded away to make room for Steve Young. Despite being in his late 30s, Montana proved he still had the magic, leading the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game in the 1993 season. However, 1994 would be the end of the road. Montana struggled with injuries throughout his final campaign, but he still managed to lead Kansas City to a 9-7 record and a playoff berth. His final game took place on December 31, 1994, in an AFC wildcard matchup against the Miami Dolphins. It was a heavyweight battle, Montana versus Marino. For 3 quarters, it looked like Joe might pull off one last miracle. He threw for 314 yards and 2 touchdowns, completing 26 of 37 passes. But the Chiefs' defense couldn't contain Dan Marino, and Montana's final pass, a desperate attempt to move the chains late in the 4th quarter, fell incomplete. The Chiefs lost 27-17. Montana didn't officially announce his retirement until April of 1995 at a massive event in San Francisco. But that afternoon in the humidity of Miami was the last time the greatest clutch performer of his era would ever take a snap. Jim Brown. Jim Brown is perhaps the only player on this list who retired, while he was still indisputably the best player in the league. In 1965, Brown led the NFL in rushing for the 8th time in his 9-year career, racking up 1,544 yards and 17 touchdowns in just 14 games. He was the reigning NFL MVP. His final game was the 1965 NFL Championship game against the Green Bay Packers on January 2, 1966. The game was played on a muddy, slush-covered field at Lambeau Grove. Facing Vince Lombardi's legendary defense, Brown was held to just 50 yards on 12 carries, though he did add 44 yards through the air. The Browns lost 23-12. At the time, no one knew it was his finale. Brown went to London that summer to film The Dirty Dozen. When production was delayed due to bad weather, Brown's owner Modell threatened to fine him if he didn't report to training camp. Brown, never one to be intimidated, simply sent a letter announcing his retirement at the age of 30. He walked away at the absolute peak of his powers, leaving the game as its all-time leading rusher. Dan Marino. If Jim Brown's exit was a sudden shock, Dan Marino's was a slow, painful heartbreak. By 1999, the quick-release legend was 38 years old and playing on 2 of the most fragile Achilles tendons in sports history. The Dolphins struggled under Jimmy Johnson, but they managed to scrape into the playoffs and even won a wild-card game against Seattle. This set the stage for a divisional round matchup on January 15, 2000, against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It turned into the most lopsided defeat in modern playoff history. The Jaguars led 24-0 at the end of the 1st quarter and 41-7 at halftime. Marino, the man who had broken every passing record in the book, looked completely human. He finished the game with 11 completions on 25 attempts for just 95 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. He also fumbled twice. When Marino was pulled from the game in the second half, the score was 62-7. It was a tragic, unceremonious end for a player who had given the city of Miami 17 years of brilliance. He retired shortly after, turning down offers from other teams because he couldn't imagine wearing anything but the teal and orange. Walter Payton's sweetness was the heart and soul of the Chicago Bears for 13 seasons. By 1987, the wear and tear of 3,138 career carries had finally begun to slow the great Walter Payton. He had reached the mountaintop in 1985 with a victory in Super Bowl 20, but in his final season, he shared the backfield with Neil Anderson. Payton's last game occurred on January 10, 1988, in a divisional playoff game against the Washington Redskins at a frigid Soldier Field. The Bears jumped out to a 14-3 lead, but Joe Gibbs's Redskins roared back. Payton struggled to find running lanes against a stout Washington front, finishing his final afternoon with 85 yards on 18 carries and catching 3 passes for 20 yards. The Bears lost 21-17. As the clock hit 0, Payton sat on the bench for a long time, watching the Redskins celebrate. He didn't want to leave the field. He finished his career as the NFL's all-time leading rusher with 16,726 yards, a record that many thought would never be broken until Emmitt Smith came along. Terry Bradshaw's career didn't end with a full game, but rather with a single heroic half of football. By 1983, the 4-time Super Bowl champion was dealing with a devastating elbow injury that had kept him out for the first 14 games of the season. The Pittsburgh Steelers were fighting for a playoff spot and needed a win against the New York Jets on December 10, 1983. Bradshaw decided to gut it out. In the first half, he looked like the MVP of old, completing 5 of 8 passes for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. He led the Steelers to a 14-0 lead and moved them into the record books. However, after throwing his second touchdown pass to Calvin Sweeney, Bradshaw felt something pop in his elbow. He walked to the sideline, knowing it was over. He didn't play the second half, and he never played again. The Steelers won the game 34-7, but they lost their leader. Bradshaw underwent surgery in the off-season, but realized his arm would never be the same. He retired in July 1984, leaving behind a legacy of postseason dominance that few have ever matched. Roger Stauback, Captain America, was the man who made the Dallas Cowboys America's team in the 1970s. Entering the 1979 season, Stauback was still playing at an elite level. In fact, he led the NFL in passer rating that year and orchestrated one of his signature 20-point comebacks against the Washington Redskins in the regular season finale to win the NFC East. However, concussions were becoming a serious concern. His final game was an NFC divisional playoff against the Los Angeles Rams on December 30, 1979. It was a tight, defensive struggle. Stauback threw a touchdown pass to Billy Joe Dupree to take a 19-14 lead late in the game, but the Rams scored a touchdown with 2 minutes left to win 21-19. Stauback finished 12 of 28 for 124 yards. Despite having years of football left in his arm, the medical advice regarding his head injuries was clear. In March of 1980, Stauback shocked the football world by announcing his retirement at age 38. He left the game with the highest career passer rating of any quarterback to that point, Joe Namath. Joe Namath is the man who guaranteed a win in Super Bowl III and changed the AFL-NFL landscape forever. But by the late 70s, Broadway Joe was playing on knees that had been surgically repaired so many times they were practically held together by tape. After 12 years with the New York Jets, Namath signed with the Los Angeles Rams in 1977 for one final act. It was not the Hollywood ending he hoped for. His final game came on a rainy Monday Night Football matchup against the Chicago Bears on October 31, 1977. The conditions were terrible. Namath's mobility was non-existent. He threw 4 interceptions and was constantly harassed by the Bears' pass rush. The Rams lost 24-7. After that performance, coach Chuck Knox benched Namath for Pat Hayden. Namath spent the rest of the season on the sidelines, a legend in a uniform that didn't quite fit, watching his team lose in the playoffs. He retired at the end of the season, a flashy icon whose body had finally betrayed his immense talent. Fran Tarkenton. Fran Tarkenton was the original dual-threat quarterback, a man who turned broken plays into magic for the Vikings and Giants. The Mad Scrambler retired, holding every significant passing record in NFL history. In his final season in 1978, Tarkenton actually led the league in passing yards with 3,468, an incredible feat for a 38-year-old in that era. However, he also threw a career-high 32 interceptions. Fran Tarkenton held every major passing record when he retired. His final game was the regular season finale against the Los Angeles Rams on December 17, 1978. It was a tough, physical game where Tarkenton completed 19 of 33 passes for 262 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, he also threw 3 interceptions as the Vikings fell 31-17. Despite the loss, Minnesota clinched the NFC Central Division title because the Packers also lost that weekend. But the physical cost was high. Tarkenton suffered a shoulder injury during the game that prevented him from playing in the following week's playoff loss to the Rams. He announced his retirement in the spring of 1979, leaving the game as the king of the stat sheet. He walked away as the king of the stat sheet, though that elusive Super Bowl ring always remained just out of reach despite 4 appearances. Lawrence Taylor.
The New York Giants, first-round selection, Lawrence Taylor, linebacker, North Carolina.
Lawrence Taylor changed the way the linebacker position was played and the way offenses protected the quarterback. By 1993, the LT, who had terrorized the league in the 80s, was slowed by age, and a devastating Achilles injury suffered a year prior. Still, he was the emotional leader of a New York Giants team that went 11-5 and won a wild-card game. His final game was a divisional playoff game against the San Francisco 49ers on January 15, 1994. It was a mismatch from the start. Ricky Watters scored a playoff record 5 rushing touchdowns as the 49ers dismantled the Giants 44-3. Taylor, who usually dictated the tempo of the game, was held to just 3 tackles. He spent the 4th quarter on the sideline, the realization of the end etched on his face. In the locker room after the game, the normally defiant Taylor was quiet. He simply said, "I'm retired. I've done everything I can do. I'm gone." It was a humble exit for the most feared defensive player in the history of the game, John Elway. We end with the Kobe Bryant of the NFL, the man who actually got the perfect ending. John Elway spent the first 13 years of his career as the superstar who couldn't win the big one. Then came the 1997 season and the "this one's for John" moment after winning Super Bowl 32. Elway returned for the 1998 season for one last run with Terrell Davis and Mike Shanahan. The Broncos were a juggernaut, starting the season 13-0. Elway's final game was Super Bowl 33 on January 31, 1999, against the Atlanta Falcons. Unlike many on this list who struggled in their finale, Elway was magnificent. He threw for 336 yards, including an 80-yard touchdown bomb to Rod Smith, and even ran for a touchdown himself. The Broncos won 34-19, and Elway was named the Super Bowl MVP. He is the only player in NFL history to win the Super Bowl MVP in the final game of his career. He waited a few months to make it official, but as he rode off in the golf cart at Pro Player Stadium in Miami, everyone knew they had just seen the perfect conclusion to a legendary career. The end of a career is a reminder that even the titans of the turf are subject to the passage of time. Whether it was Elway's golden exit or Marino's 62-7 heartbreak, these final games are a part of the rich tapestry of the NFL. These men gave us decades of memories, from the 1960s through the 1980s and beyond, and their impact on the game will never be forgotten. Which of these retirements hit you the hardest? Do you remember where you were when Montana played his last snap? Or when Elway hoisted that final trophy? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next trip down memory lane.